Hey, everybody. Welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have Mimi Rocah with us today. We'll chat with Mimi in just a second. But first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. All right. There is madness all around us. Let's get right into it. The big things. I want to start with the chaos. To sort of summarize the first month of Trump 2.0, we've got a stock market that's crashing. We have jobless claims that are up. We have consumer confidence that's tanking. We have Trump's approval rating plummeting. We have a deadly measles outbreak. Americans are terrified to fly. Voters are flooding Republican town halls. Americans are jamming congressional phone lines. And Trump voters are having buyer's remorse. Not a bad honeymoon period.
All that you say is true, but if you tune in to other news sources or you speak to people who are not diehard liberals, you're going to hear a different story in a different perspective.
Well, I'm not sure what exactly you're talking about. So I'll tell you about what I see. Okay. Now, again, as I've always said, there's 77 million people who voted for Trump. We don't need all of them to get pissed off. We need 5 million of them to get pissed off. So what I'm seeing on TV are interviews with a lot of Trump voters who are either pissed off because they don't like the chaos, pissed off because they don't like the spending cuts, pissed off because they have lost their own jobs or they have family members who are losing jobs. So we have to define when we talk about buyer's remorse. It doesn't mean every Republican who voted for Trump, but all we need is a few of them.
I'm listening to NPR and I'm hearing people talk about the benefits of some of the tariffs. I'm hearing the benefits of the potential ending of the Ukraine war. And you know where I stand, but I think it depends on where you're getting your news from and how it's spun and how it's interpreted.
I'm getting it from CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, Washington Post, The Independent, USA Today. I'm aggregating what I see because if I just look at one outlet, if you're getting your news in a very siloed manner, that's not a broad perspective of what's out there. So I think it's a pretty accurate statement to make that there are many Republicans and many Trump voters who are not happy with the way this administration has started its second term.
I think it's fair to say that there are a number of people who voted for Trump who are definitely regretting their vote. How big that number is, not sure. He seems to always round out to about 38% of voters are always in favor. But this is, an administration that's used to minority rule. They won the last election with a minority of the vote. They only had a plurality here. And so the fact that there are discontented Republican voters, I don't think he really cares, especially since this is his last run. And
you say that.
Well, supposedly his last run. And if it isn't, there's other issues which may very well rear their ugly head. But I think what Jen was getting to is that if you are in a different media bubble, which does not include any of the ones you just listed, which are really basically considered liberal media at this point.
Well, I got to push back on that. You can't take every major mainstream media news organization and A, put them in a bucket of liberal, and B, then draw a conclusion that means they're not subjective or fair or accurate. I'm saying that I'm looking across the board. I'm even looking at the New York Post. The New York Post. So I'm taking everything I see from both the left and the right. And again, I think it's an inarguable fact that right now there's a lot of people on the right who are not happy. Now, what the totals are of those people? Absolutely. We don't know. What they may or may not do in the next election, we don't know.
I think you misconstrued what I meant by liberal media. What I was saying is that the overwhelming majority of people who voted for Trump read nothing that you just mentioned and watch none of that media. They don't watch MSNBC.
This is the bubble we all have to get out of. It's the people that matter. It's not about what Fox tells them. It's not about what we tell them. It's about how are they feeling. That's my point, and that's what I opened up with. They feel and see chaos. They see and feel their retirement funds dropping. They see and feel people getting terminated in their jobs, including themselves. They are not confident with the economy right now in terms of consumer confidence. They are worried about measles. They are worried about flying. They are the ones going to town halls. They are the ones also calling their congressional representatives. And therefore, they are having buyer's remorse. So this is what got Democrats into trouble in the first place. Not listening to people. I'm listening to them. And I'm hearing them say they're not happy.
No question, polls are showing that numbers are down for Trump, and there are a lot of people who are afraid of flying. New polls out today from Navigator, which show a substantial portion of Americans, more than 60%, are clearly concerned with what's going on. No question about it. But if you were to tune in to Fox News, or you were to read Breitbart, or you were to look at Facebook feeds, where the overwhelming majority of Trump supporters get their news from, you will find dozens of people interviewed constantly saying how much and how happy they are with these cuts and how this is the greatest thing that's
but
ever
we're
happened.
going around in circles. People are saying they're not happy. Other people saying they're happy doesn't negate the sentiments coming from those who say they're unhappy. And what I am saying is, we don't know what the quantity is of these people. We don't know what they're going to do with the polls, if they're going to show up. But the fact is, an appreciable number of Trump's supporters and Republicans are beginning to express serious dismay with this administration. And if that continues, that does not bode well for Donald Trump. So history shows that the incumbent president loses Congress, or at least one chamber of Congress, in the first midterm election. And the way that may happen for Democrats is if a lot of these people who voted for him now vote for Democrats. So the fact that either they may vote for a Democrat or they may stay home is a big plus for Democrats. And the reason that would happen is if they're unhappy. So I think it's really important that it's chaotic and people are not happy with what they see and feel. Well, most importantly, feel.
I mean, to your point, it'll be a very interesting exploration to see how unhappy people are with the 3 special elections that are coming up even before 2026.
Absolutely.
April to June. And then, that'll really have a pulse on, has it galvanized Republicans, particularly, because that's who they'll be replacing 4 Republican representatives. And, let's see.
Well, I think you're raising a really good point. And I think it's important to sort of understand the potential or lack thereof with those. For example, Josh Wheel down in Florida. He's running for the seat being vacated by Mike Waltz. It's a pretty solidly Republican district. Trump won that district by 30 points. Will Josh win? It would be great. But if Josh comes close, if he comes close enough, if he shows momentum in that district, because don't forget, we're only a month into this administration. And if people are upset, a lot of these people are also sitting back and going, but let's see how it goes. Maybe it'll settle down. So we're not at the point yet where people have said, fuck it, this is enough. You can't say enough is enough after 1 month.
But maybe after 2.
But maybe after 2. So I think you're right. I think it's going to be real interesting to see what the sentiment is, what warnings are being placed by Republican voters, what red flags are being raised.
I mean, assuming we have a free and fair election in the future.
Yeah. Well, look, it is an absolute shit show. And we got to hope that Republican voters, some of them at least, can finally sit back and say, wait a second, this is just not working out. Anyway, let's get to our winners and losers.
My winner, nepotism. Donald Trump's hunting buddy, Kyle Diamantis, who has no previous experience, will be in charge of food safety at the FDA.
Yum.
My loser, our national security. Why build trust and relationships with a country that promises support and then terminates funding programs for polio, HIV, malaria, and nutrition programs around the world?
I don't have a winner this week because I don't see any winners out there. But my big loser is Tesla, which has lost $400 billion since Trump became president. Still has about $929 billion left in value. We should get that down quite a bit, I'm hoping.
My winner, the Independent's White House correspondent, Andrew Feinberg, for pressing Donald Trump about who actually pays tariffs. Feinberg told Trump it is U.S. importers and consumers, not countries. And he also asked Trump about his desire to turn Canada, in front of British Prime Minister Starmer, Canada, which is part of the Commonwealth of former British Empire territories, into America's 51st state. Andrew Feinberg is the only reporter that seems to be able to ask a serious question of this president, which gets us to the weekly rant. I think it's time for the mainstream media to withdraw itself from the White House press room, because covering this administration is pointless when the President of the United States stands before the media and spews nothing but lies, misinformation, disinformation, and propaganda. What is the point of attending a press conference and asking a question and getting nothing but a lie as the answer? What is the point of being there when absolutely nothing that comes out of Donald Trump's mouth is truthful? A reporter asks Donald Trump, how much is 1 + 1? And he says 3. But here's the bigger problem. Virtually no one in the room says, wait a second, sir, the correct answer is 2, not 3. And even more important, when he says, no, it's 3, there's virtually no one in the room who continues to push back saying, sir, that is not the truth. The correct answer is 2. Why are you lying about this? So until there is more than just 1 or 2 brave reporters willing to stand up to push back on the incessant bullshit that comes out of this White House and this president, they should just cover it from a distance. There are plenty of resources and opportunities to get the information, plenty of sources of information. Politicians love to talk, aides love to leak, and the news will always ultimately get out. But the media needs to stop letting itself be bitch-slapped by a president and his administration, which has zero respect for it, and worse, as demonstrated by its attacks on the Associated Press and its decision to choose press pool reporters and thus censor coverage it doesn't like. This is an administration that has utter disdain for our free and independent press. And for what it's worth, the worst thing you can do to Trump is ignore him. So it's time to boycott the White House. All right, let's get to Mimi Rocah. She was most recently district attorney of New York's Westchester County, and during her 4 years as DA, she modernized the DA's office, aggressively pursued gun and violent crime, developed ways to better serve crime victims, and instituted sensible criminal justice reforms. Prior to becoming DA, she served as an Assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, also known as SDNY, for nearly 17 years, from 2001 to 2017, rising to become chief of the White Plains Criminal Division. As an AUSA, she prosecuted and oversaw cases involving violent crime, organized crime, human trafficking, sex trafficking, child exploitation, frauds and public corruption, and co-chaired task forces on public health and sex trafficking. Before running for office, Mimi was a legal analyst with MSNBC and NBC News from 2017 to 2019, and is now a frequent commentator on MSNBC, CNN, The Contrarian, and numerous podcasts and radio shows on topics relating to law, justice, women's issues, and antisemitism, and has written and published dozens of opinion pieces on those topics. She is an expert in the rule of law, democracy, and the corruption and abuse of the justice system, and she is currently an adjunct professor at Fordham University School of Law. Mimi, welcome into the back room.
Hi, Andy. Thank you. Glad to be here.
So there is just so much to talk about with Trump, but what I want to do is start off with a lot of the legal stuff. So let's start with the Supreme Court. Last night, it paused the District Court of Appeals order for the Trump administration to restart almost $2 billion in foreign aid payments by midnight last night, and asked for briefs from the parties by noon today. Help us unpack what could eventually be a very consequential ruling. What does it all mean?
Well, one thing I just want to point out on this, the probably not what you expected to talk about, but I think it's worth highlighting is the Supreme Court can act very quickly when it wants to, right? We if you remember back during when Judge,
I remember.
Yeah, was trying to get them to act quickly. And I just think it's worth a mention at least because
it's worth, in a sense, more than a mention because it really shows how the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, which is supposed to be non-political, clearly when it comes to the timing of very important consequential rulings, appears to be very political.
Yeah, and that's at the heart of the problem. Look, I think, this is one of those we have to wait and see because how consequential it is really depends on what they rule and frankly what they not because they're not going to rule immediately, but what posture they take in terms of even deciding the case.
Mm-hmm.
There are still many different ways it could go. They hit pause and asked for briefing,
Mm-hmm.
but they still could issue a decision without any kind of argument. There's a lot of different directions still for it to even go in terms of us knowing how consequential of a decision it will be, if that makes sense.
Well, yes, hanging on by a thread is the issue of balance of power. That to me is where this decision is ultimately going to come down on whether or not the Trump administration or Trump himself just has the ability to bypass Congress and control spending, which is not what the founding fathers put in the Constitution.
Right. And that issue showed itself from day one in executive orders that Trump was issuing, including this one that's at issue about the foreign aid payments and whether the executive branch can do that unilaterally after the money has been allocated by Congress. What I meant, I guess, is I don't know, I could be wrong, but I don't think we know yet whether they are going to decide it on the substance yet. If they do decide it on the substance, which a decision, as we know with the Supreme Court, even though they acted quickly here, the decision wouldn't come until sometime this summer. So it would still be several months away. But it would be very defining. But if they decide to dispose of it in some way other than the merits, or say it's not ripe, or someone doesn't have there's all sorts of different ways as observers of all courts have learned that decisions get made other than on the merits. And I could be wrong, but I don't think it's clear yet that we know that this will end up being a ruling on the merits.
Well, it's so interesting when you think about how the court is split. You have these conservatives who love to state all the time how they are strict constitutionalists. And if you look at this particular case, it's pretty cut and dry. If you follow the Constitution, the executive branch does not control spending, and especially does not have power to control spending that's already been allocated by Congress. So we kind of know how the liberals will vote, but it'll be interesting to see, in particular, I guess, with Roberts and perhaps Amy Coney Barrett, whether they're going to really stick to their core principles or not.
Yeah, exactly. They basically are, to the extent we have swing justices, which I don't think they can actually be defined that way, but at least people that you don't know ahead of time how they are likely to vote, which is not how it should be. We really shouldn't know how any of them are going to vote ahead of time, except when the law is really clear, like here, I think it is. And when there are people who justices like Thomas, who seem to repeatedly just sort of ignore the law or twist it to justify the end that they want, like they did, I believe, with the presidential immunity decision. That was a decision where, to me, the opinion read like something where, they wanted a result, and here we're going to twist and turn the law and our recitation of it to get there. And it really didn't. It felt very result oriented.
Yeah. Well, so speaking of executive orders, Trump this week signed one that stripped the security clearances held by lawyers at a prominent Washington law firm, Covington and Burling, which provided legal services to special counsel Jack Smith. So from a big picture standpoint, how significant do you think this is?
Yeah, Covington and Burling. I mean, the lawyer, I'm in several discussion groups, let's call them, with lawyers. I think the lawyers in the world immediately realized, whoa, this is a whole other level dangerous. And we keep saying that, but I'll keep saying it, because here it's not just what we all have been talking about and will continue to talk about, the politicalization and corruption of the government justice system. But now you're reaching out and you're targeting a private business, because law firms are a business, for doing a case that you didn't like, that the executive didn't like. Well, where does that end, right? What is here it's very clear. We all know to say he has a grudge against Jack Smith is, to put it way too mildly. He has a vendetta against Jack Smith and will try to burn down and punish anyone and anything that touched the case, or anything to do with the special counsel's legitimate mission. Even if you didn't like the result, it was certainly a legitimate mission. And it is an encroachment on the right to counsel, right? So people who have chosen Covington and Burling, including criminal defendants who may have nothing to do with this, absolutely nothing to do with this, may even be companies that Donald Trump and Elon Musk would like to help. I don't know, that they have chosen Covington and Burling as their counsel. And now their counsel is limited because of this ruling, this order by Trump, that they can't have access to certain, materials and documents and security clearances. At the end of the day, I think Covington will still be able to do its job, but it is more difficult. It puts a target on them, a taint on them that is completely, to call it unfair doesn't do it justice. It's unethical. And I think there's very good argument, it violates the right to counsel and the right to free speech. And I'm sure there will be numerous lawsuits and lawyers eager to take it up. I was very happy to see already yesterday the New York City NYCDL, New York City Defense Lawyers Association, which is a very large and powerful organization nationally, not just here in New York, put out a very good statement about it very quickly. I hope that every other bar association is working on them, because this is repeatedly a time when lawyers need to step up and forget party, forget politics, just talk about the rules of ethics and the rule of law, and do that in a unified voice, because otherwise this isn't the last law firm that this is going to happen to, is the clear message here, right? It's very mafia-like. I'm sending a signal to every other law firm that might take a case that, is damaging to me, that I will seek retribution.
Yeah, and Covington itself didn't appear to be too intimidated. They issued a statement saying they'll continue to represent Jack Smith where he needs it and do their job. And so I'm not sure. I understand the goal of the Trump crowd is to intimidate and issue a warning and make people scared. But I just don't, I have a lot of lawyer friends and I've been talking to them as well. It's like, I just don't know how these white shoe law firms are going to be when it comes to Trump. But, it's a wait and see.
It's an important question, though, because, there has been a call for other pro bono lawyers to step up and help with some of the lawsuits that are being filed by organizations, Norm Eisen in particular, through State Democracy Defenders. but many others who are doing incredible work, challenging some of these rulings, and having success in the courts because they're so blatantly illegal. And there is a need for law firms who have the resources to dedicate to this and kind of thing. And I hope that they don't get intimidated out of it.
Yeah. Well, we've had Mark Zaid on this podcast a few times, and he's one of those lawyers who offers pro bono services. And he's also a lawyer who's been stripped of his security clearance, and he doesn't seem to be intimidated either. And I think, between the lawyers and the bar associations and the courts themselves, I think it's really an important check that is so far seeming to exist against Trump. Let's talk about Ed Martin. He's the Trump-appointed acting U.S. attorney for D.C., who said this week, and I quote, "As President Trump's lawyers, we are proud to fight to protect his leadership as our president, and we are vigilant in standing against entities like the AP that refuse to put America first." As Trump's lawyers. My first thought when I saw that was, what the fuck? Okay, because it is beyond.
That's the legal term.
It's the legal term in my house for sure.
Yes.
But it is beyond unconscionable. But this should be sounding some serious alarm bells, no?
Yeah, beyond alarm bells. I mean, I think we're beyond the bells, right? And I just want to unpack that a little bit because you're right. The first and foremost outrageous part of that statement, which again, all my lawyer chat groups, and you don't have to be a lawyer to know how outrageous it is. The idea that a U.S. attorney running a criminal and civil, prosecutor's office is there to service the president. It's as opposed to justice or the law or the rule of law or the Constitution or whatever phrase you want to use.
Mm-hmm.
But second of all, the example he gave, right, about the AP. We're talking about freedom of the press. When I was in the U.S. Attorney's Office, and this is true for the Department of Justice, so it's true at every U.S. Attorney's Office across the country, there are such strict guidelines about prosecutors' interaction with the press. You cannot issue a subpoena to a member of the press the way you issue it to anybody else. There are always, checks and balances on issuing subpoenas. You have to have a certain standard of, belief that something is occurring and that you're likely to find evidence of that. In whatever your subpoena. I mean, there are other guardrails, but with the press, there's like extra super duper guardrails, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're supposed to go all the way up the chain, basically, to the DAG's office to get permission, and you have to justify it because up until now, the Department of Justice, under every administration, Republican or Democrat, has been, maybe to some varying degrees, but overall protective of the freedom of the press. And now you have the head of an office not only saying, I'm here to serve the president, but I'm here to serve the president by targeting the press. So it's like double layer, just really not just shocking, but unethical. It's unethical in my view. And I think there have been or will be bar complaints filed against him. I'm sure he doesn't care. He's a walking conflict of interest. He's ruling on cases that he had personal participation in. He's just unfit to serve in that office. But, he is clearly undeterred, but we need to keep pointing out what is so bad about it and dangerous.
And let's call it what it is. I mean, it looks and smells like fascism. That's how fascist regimes operate. Protect their leader, squash the media, destroy the power of the courts and any other political entities. And so it is terrifying. And with this kind of comment that Martin made, which illustrates that type of institutional coup that's taking place at our most critical law enforcement agencies, coupled with the Supreme Court's immunity ruling that you mentioned last year, do we now have a United States president who not only believes this, but is also acting as if he can do anything he wants? And who's going to stop him?
Oh, yes. I mean, 100%. this whole idea of dictator for a day has extended for every day he's been in office. I mean, there are so many examples of it. As you said at the beginning, it's hard to keep up. And look, I have to admit, I'll make a confession here that I'm sure I'll get skewered for, but I tried to go into this administration with a more open mind, right? I was not happy, is to put it mildly, with the first administration, Trump administration. I spoke out about things that I saw. I really tried to have a more open mind that it wasn't going to be as bad this time. And, we can't just start getting hysterical about every single thing. And I'm still trying to do that. But it's been worse than I thought it would be and feared it would be. There's no question, I think, if you're looking at this reasonably. And there are a couple of things that tell me that. One is even people who I would say, are not democratically leaning politically. I think I've seen some of them saying, well, this doesn't feel very American is really right. It's not about politics. It doesn't to sort of demonize the workforce. We can just talk about Elon Musk for an hour, because putting this unelected guy with his, little outfit and chainsaw in charge of so-called efficiency. I mean, everyone's in favor of efficiency. Yes, we get that. And maybe, people had not been effective enough at making it happen quickly enough, but there's a reason it happens slowly. You can't just take a chainsaw to the U.S. government and its workers and the people. And it's going to affect not only the entire federal workforce, which it already is, which are real human beings, but it's going to affect all of us who aren't in the federal workforce. We are going to feel it. We are feeling it, I think. And that is, again, as you say, whatever label you want. I mean, that is not how democracy works. That is a totalitarian, fascist type of slashing and cutting, and has no regard for merit that they claim to care so much about. Really qualified, unpolitical, non-political people are being cut out, shut out from the FBI, from the DOJ, from the FAA, from the military, from the most important organizations that we have. And there are always going to be examples of people who, maybe should have, been terminated way back when. I mean, that's the nature of most large organizations, but that doesn't justify what they're doing. And I don't think they're even trying to hide. I mean, as you said, I don't think he's trying to hide it right now. Trump is full on. I think the cabinet meeting that he had yesterday was a perfect example. He announced ahead of time that his cabinet is happy with Elon Musk. And then in front of the cameras, he asked everybody, is anybody not happy with Elon Musk? I mean, again, I keep going back because I was an organized crime prosecutor for 8 years. So I have all these scenarios. And this country is being run like an organized crime racket right now, in my opinion. It is all through pressure and intimidation and threats and, signage, whatever you want to call it, like you do to one. Doing this out in the open. Is anybody going to question my loyalty? I mean, it's like right out of the mafia playbook. And it would be funny and a great movie if it weren't real life and really, I think, destroying our country.
Yeah, no, it's totally The Godfather without the charm and the good looks of Robert De Niro, Marlon Brando, and Al Pacino. But if we just summarize for a second, inflation is rising, prices are going up, consumer confidence is tanking, the stock market's tanking, Trump's approval rating is tanking, courts are ruling against him, Republicans are flooding GOP town halls, angry over the spending cuts, the firings. They're also jamming the congressional phone lines with complaints. We see Trumpers having buyer's remorse. There's obvious infighting and friction between the cabinet and Musk, and there's plenty of chaos. And it's only 1 month in. So I have this theory, and that is the belief that this is the gang that can't shoot straight, and that given enough time and rope, they will hang themselves through gross incompetence and that chaos we speak of. And that's what may ultimately save us. This is your opportunity to slap me like Cher did Nicolas Cage in Moonstruck and say, snap out of it.
No, I mean, I'm not going to say I totally agree, but I'm not going to totally disagree either. Sorry. Because here's why. I think you're right. I do think they're incompetent. There clearly is infighting. I mean, the look on the faces of the cabinet members while Musk was speaking, I think he makes Trump look weak and small, and his whole brand is, big and powerful. And so I think that is eroding. I think, so we see the problems. And again, I think as people start to feel the impact of this slash and burn, reckless approach to things, they will get even more. But, and here's the but that I worry about a lot, the PR machine. Trump, they have mastered it. I mean, it's part of how I think they won the election. And, I listen to Fox News quite a bit just to see what is being said. And it's an entire different universe. Not everything they say is a false spin or a lie, but most of it. And so if you listen to that world, and Fox is just obviously one example. I mean, it goes way beyond that to the podcasts and, talk radio, et cetera. But it's just an alternate universe where Elon Musk is making the government more efficient. And of course we should want this. And it's just presented in this way that if you're not someone really following it and you're kind of tuning in and out, which most Americans only have the time to tune in and out or see the headlines, now and then, and they maybe only get it from one source. You wouldn't know this. And so that is what worries me. And I haven't seen that the Democrats, or I'm not even going to say Democrats, because there are so many Republicans, former Republicans, or people who still call themselves Republicans, but non-Trumpers who are, obviously very, very deeply invested and mobilized in trying to defeat this. But I don't know that people have figured out that counter approach yet. And I don't know if they will. I think people are trying to figure it out, but I think it's hard. So, I'm hopeful that there will be at least a Democratic majority to counterbalance this excessive power that we have right now in the executive branch, because the Republicans clearly, even though it's eroding their power, the Republicans in Congress are not going to push back at all, which is really where the main blame should lie. I mean, we have different branches for a reason, and they are in power. They should not be there just to rubber stamp and serve Trump, but they too are scared. They should be there to uphold their power in the congressional branch. So, I think that's my kind of wishy-washy, like, I'm a little afraid, but I'll remain cautiously optimistic until I see otherwise, which is what I tend to do.
Well, I'm going to try to bolster my belief with a couple of other gangster references. So in Goodfellas, there's that scene where they're all in the bar and his mooks come in with their ladies and they're all wearing the fur coats and the Cadillacs are outside that they just all bought. And De Niro freaks because he told them to lay low. And these idiots, right? What did they do? Now, the difference to me, this is example one, the difference to me is that in that mob, De Niro's character is really smart. Okay, so at the head of that mob, you had a bright guy, as gangsters can be bright. We don't have that in this mob, right? So that's example number one. Number two is, let's talk about John Gotti, another guy whose image was all about bigness and bluster and power, but also had very similar narcissistic, showman-like qualities of Trump. Now, what happened to him? So this gets back to the gang that can't shoot straight. Now, if I were you, I'd be like, okay, well, Andy, Yes, the mafia died off, but look how long it took. They operated for decades and decades. And my response would be, yes, but the equivalent of that in politics would be like during that period, they were a well-run Republican-like oiled machine, which we also don't have today. So to me, it's like if you take a company and you put from top to bottom nothing but incompetent, unqualified, chaotic people, what are they going to achieve? They may coast for a while and look like they're doing shit, but it's all a shell game. That's how I see them. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I'm just a naive libtard, but look, James Carville said 30 days from now, this administration is going to implode. Okay. I love James Carville. I'm not sure I agree with him on that in particular, but I think if he had said 6 months, I would start to agree with him more.
Look, I hope that, I don't want any administration of our country to ever implode because then where are we? But at this moment, I think that would probably be less dangerous than what is happening. So, I never try not to make predictions. But I think that I'm personally, and we don't even get into a debate about this, I don't think everybody is incompetent, but I think that the people that he is empowering, namely himself and Musk be, I guess, is not incompetent in certain respects, but he certainly has no business at all, expertise or
temperament
or the mentality to run the government. He doesn't know the first thing about it, and it is different than a business. And reform is good, and change is good, and efficiency is good, but it is not the way that this should be happening. So I think it's going to be a longer term thing because, again, I think it's going to be about people feeling the effects of it, which unfortunately a lot of people are going to suffer, I think. And not
they already are. That's why they're going to the town halls.
Exactly. And the thousands of even federal employees that have been either laid off or fired or intimidated into resigning, that alone is not an insignificant impact on our country's economy and psyche. Like it or not, the federal government is sort of, the thing that people love to hate, but also need. And I've always been a big believer in institutions, which clearly is very passé right now. But I still think that institutions are the people who make them up. And we rely on them in ways we don't even realize. And I think people are going to start realizing it more and more, people who never even thought about it before. And that's where I think the impact will come in. And I hope people realize it before it's too late.
Yeah, well, what you're saying is really the key, and that is that the government is nothing but, of the people, for the people, by the people, right? And the people hold all the power. They just need to understand that and act on it. What are your biggest concerns over the recent firing of prosecutors and inspectors general?
Oh, where to begin? They keep talking about the de-weaponization of the Department of Justice and the justice system as a whole, because as you say, it's beyond that. The inspectors general that were fired, who are the people, by the way, who seek out fraud, waste, and corruption in the government. So right. Even if you didn't think they were doing a good job, though there was no allegation of that, then okay, give them a new program, give them new guidelines, put in new ones, replace them, but just getting rid of them kind of tells the lie to the goal of the whole story, I think. But I don't even like to use the word weaponization or de-weaponization anymore because it's become meaningless, right? I mean, I'm weaponizing. No, you're weaponizing. No, well, I mean, they have eroded the meaning of it so much effectively. This is part of the PR thing I'm talking about.
To your point, the ultimate erosion is that they've created a weaponization committee to actually do weaponization.
Right. Which is why we can't rely on that terminology anymore. I think what I try to talk about now, and I'm still figuring this out, admittedly, because again, this all happened faster and more extreme than I even thought it would or feared it would. It's a corruption of anything and anyone, institution or person who either has attempted to hold Trump as president or as private citizen accountable and might do so in the future. And it is a signal to anyone else who might do so in the future, right? So for every prosecutor who was terminated because they touched a January 6th case, never mind that the person doing the firing, Emil Bove, the acting deputy attorney general himself, worked on January 6th cases for the complete hypocrisy. But it is assigned to people who might have a case come across their desk that, implicates one of Trump's allies, an Elon Musk company. I mean, who knows that if you do this, you're going to lose your job. And with the inspectors general, I mean, the same obvious, blatant message. And so to me, what is being done, I mean, the Adams case in the Southern District, which I've talked about and wrote about, is kind of a prime example, but it's not really about the Southern District. It is the ultimate attempt to use and manipulate the justice system for his political, personal enrichment. Whatever his deal is with Mayor Eric Adams, you can call it a quid pro quo, whatever. But Emil Bove admitted in a letter to Danielle Sassoon, the acting U.S. attorney in the Southern District at the time, that it was to enable Adams to, do his job. It was not based on the merits of the case. That is like the ultimate corruption of the system. And so that is how I think we have to really talk about this in terms of corrupting the justice system, which, as you pointed out, really is, that doesn't happen at this level and extent in a democracy. It happens in fascist and totalitarian countries where the executive owns the justice system. And so that is what they're doing. I mean, and they're doing it methodically. And it's not just the justice system as we think of it, it's the FBI, and then it goes on to the military. I mean, I'll stick to the FBI and DOJ, which I know best, but it's, and it's not done. I don't think we're done.
No, and as you said earlier, it's all being done out in the open. I mean, Tom Homan sat with Eric Adams on TV and laughed and said, if he doesn't do what we agreed, I am going to be up his butt. Well, you just said you're trying to drop the charges against him. Well, what kind of agreement? If that doesn't signal a quid pro quo, I don't know what does. But what about the JAG firings and the impact on military legal oversight?
Yeah, I mean, again, why is he targeting lawyers, right? Lawyers, not every lawyer, right? I'm not saying every lawyer is, although it's funny, someone somewhere on social media said, I apologize to all the lawyers for all the bad things I ever said about you. You're our heroes. Not every lawyer is a hero, and we've seen lawyers do unethical things. But lawyers are, in general, supposed to be at least, governed by not just a kind of general sense of right and wrong, but a set of ethical rules under each state. We learn in law school about right and wrong and doing the right thing. And I think that targeting the lawyers is a very deliberate attempt, again, to eradicate the people who they view most as standing in the way of just unfettered power to the executive, whether it's legal, whether it's ethical, whether it's morally right or not.
So I believe now there are about maybe 60 or more lawsuits filed against the Trump administration. We've already seen some major victories relating to like birthright citizenship and spending. And in one 90-minute period on Tuesday, Trump suffered 3 different losses relating to federal grants and loans, U.S. aid and State Department funds, and refugee admissions and funding. The judicial system, it's working dutifully and hard to serve as a critical check, especially as Congress has been completely subjugated. Do you think this guardrail can hold, given the weight that's being put on it from the Trump administration?
Right, because, we haven't even talked about, though, I'm sure your listeners are aware, like there have been explicit calls by people in the Trump administration to, including J.D. Vance, to disobey court orders, but they don't even need to go that far, right? It's talking about impeaching judges who, issue rulings they don't like. There's implicit threats, et cetera. And even Justice Roberts, who really has not dared to, speak out much, did in his annual report in December make some reference to, no, we all need to, kind of lay off the judges. And he was talking about far left and the right, in fairness, because, the far left is not immune from that as well. But clearly it is a feature, not a bug, not a hiccup in the Trump administration and the Trump MAGA followers. So I think that judges, fortunately, federal judges have, first of all, lifetime tenure, which is, yes, theoretically there's impeachment, but I mean, even in this world, I don't think that would actually go anywhere, even though they're going to, try and make a spectacle out of it sometimes, which I think is very important. And I think judges, my experience with federal judges, though, admittedly, it's changed over the years a little bit, is that they really do view their rulings and their requirement and duty to follow the law and not let personal beliefs or politics interfere, really to, they take that to heart and they guard their power, which they know they have. And many of them relish that power, understandably, but they guard it very, very carefully. They understand that they are not part of that branch of the government and they have a different obligation. So I do think overall it will hold. It will vary from judge to judge. And then ultimately the big question as we started, so we've come full circle, is what will end up in front of the Supreme Court and what will this very divided, politicized Supreme Court do?
Yeah. And the big question is, what happens when and if he actually decides that he's not going to obey the courts, even the Supreme Court, which is where most of these cases are probably going to land? How at that point does the law get enforced, especially as we've been talking about, DOJ, FBI are all in his pocket, loyal henchmen? Who's the cop here?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is a question that a lot of people obviously are talking about. The U.S. Marshals are actually part of the executive branch, not an arm of the court, although very deferential to the court. And, I mean, this is one, and again, I'm going back into the mode where you can hit me, and say, wake up. I don't know that we're actually going to see outright defiance in the way that we're thinking, where someone's going to have to come and arrest a member of the executive branch to make something, an order be enforced. I think it's going to be much more, well, okay, we're sure they ruled on that. I mean, they've kind of already started doing this. I'm having trouble thinking of the examples, but I remember someone talking about this, that they made a ruling that we can't do this, but they didn't rule on this basis. So now we're going to act on this basis.
So they muddy it up.
And they keep going back to this example about Biden and the student loans and using that as Biden did it first, which actually is a completely different situation where, the court actually didn't rule on an entirely different basis about the student loans, but it's still, even so, I mean, I'm perfectly willing to be critical of the Biden administration, certain things that they did that made it easier and laid the groundwork for Trump and MAGA people to claim what they're doing is okay because somebody else did it before. But this is being done to such a scale and extent now, and that is part of the plan, right? I think there's a big difference when any elected official does something and sort of doesn't maybe realize until it's too late what the consequence was versus here's our plan. We're going to do this come hell or high water, and no one's going to tell us not to. But I don't know, and I could end up being tragically wrong, that it is in the way of arrest me or I'm not doing it. I think it's going to be more subtle than that. I mean, not that they're known for their subtlety, but subtle with, sort of subtle, but not where it triggers what we're talking about here.
I tend to agree with you. And I believe that deep down, he's a coward. He does not have that kind of fight in him. And to me, it doesn't matter maybe who around him might have that fight. This is a man who wakes up every day, and maybe I'll play armchair psychologist. He just wants to be loved. He wants to be popular. He needs affirmation. I mean, it's almost like a child, how he's like, see what I did? Look what I did. It's nonstop. What we're talking about is direct defiance of major Supreme Court rulings, which could send this country into a tailspin. I mean, at that point, we're just packing it in. We're done. Democracy is over. I don't think he has that in him. You see it. He'll talk about a tariff one day, the market drops. He says, okay, we'll pause it for a month. He likes to throw shit out there because it makes him feel big and important and powerful, like you said at the beginning of this conversation. But when push comes to shove, he's never really showed up to a real fight. And maybe this is my naive libtard moment once again, but I agree with you that there are other ways that the erosion will take place. It won't be that like George Wallace standoff at the school, like he doesn't have what George Wallace had. He had gravitas. He had belief in what he was doing, and he was probably willing to die or get shot for it or whatever. And look what happened to him.
I will just say, just to put a little bit of optimism in this, but I do have faith in the career, law enforcement and federal workforce, that they will not carry out what they believe to be illegal orders.
I agree.
We've seen that already with the very brave resignations by people who are self-proclaimed, Republicans, Federalists. And
we've seen Doge. We've seen the 21 Doge people quit.
I mean, there's all sorts of ones that are less high profile that we don't even know about. Now, of course, over time, so many people, good people, resign, who are ethical, that you worry, I guess, about his left. But the workforce, the workforce has been there for a long time, and they call it the deep state, and I would call it, a federal workforce with integrity.
What about attorneys general in being able to reject Trump's illegal executive orders, et cetera, and also serving as a critical guardrail? Can we take some solace there and feel optimistic that because we are the United States of America and each state has so much power, that will also help?
Sure. I mean, look, the governors and attorneys generals have already been doing exactly what their job is, which is to protect their constituencies in the ways that they think best, which seems to be, in many cases, so far Democrats. But, I wonder if we'll even see some Republican state officials defying or challenging is the better word. Sorry, let's erase defying from that. Challenging the policies that they see as very harmful to their constituencies. And we've seen it in lawsuits that the attorneys generals are filing. We've seen it in the governor's statements and orders and trying to enact legislation to protect their constituencies. And that right now is one of the big differences between the United States of America and our democracy versus other countries like Russia or other totalitarian regimes. So I do have great hope and faith in that, as well as our courts. I just wish we could see some Republicans in Congress just even once attempt to show and retain some ounce of dignity and power.
So we have Kash Patel now as the FBI director and Pam Bondi as AG. There are people like Dave Ehrenberg who worked with Bondi down in Florida when she was attorney general there and he was a prosecutor. And he said she has respect for the rule of law and he is not concerned in the way that some other people might be. From your perspective, is there any reason for optimism out of this Department of Justice, or are we headed to the kind of abuse there and in the FBI that would make J. Edgar Hoover wince?
So, I mean, I think this is a worthy of a long discussion, but I'll say this for now. Pam Bondi said all the right things in her confirmation hearings that would have been enough if she were serving under a president who wasn't trying to do all the things we've been talking about. She has made very clear that she is there to serve him. She did her swearing in the Oval Office. She let him speak and joke about how she, could or couldn't be impartial to the Democrats. She did her first interview in front of for Fox News, not a press conference, with the White House in the background. I mean, forget symbolism. Like she has made it very clear that she isn't necessarily going to be the face of it. She's employing so far Emil Bove to be the face of the destruction of the Department of Justice, but she's certainly not going to stand in the way of it. So, I mean, she could have come to this differently, but not under this president, right? She wouldn't survive. The one I'm more curious to see about, though, any hope I had has really quite a bit faded, is Todd Blanche, who used to be a good friend of mine, a colleague that I worked very closely with, who is my deputy in the U.S. Attorney's Office for 2 years. I think a lot of people who know him over the years and know how he was raised in the Department of Justice and what he was taught had hope that he would bring some measure of integrity and balance to this, but I haven't seen any sign of that yet. I know he's not technically in his role, but some of the things that have happened, there's no way he could sit there and let them happen, especially with respect to SDNY, if he were going to take that position. So, it's personally very sad for me and a lot of people, but I hope I'm proven wrong by that. I don't think I will be, but I, again, will have some cautious optimism until I'm proven wrong again.
You mentioned Congress before. When are you going to run for Congress? Because we need you in Congress. Congress needs you.
I'm flattered that you think that. We'll see. I mean, I'm not a politician. I have made that very clear. And in fact, I did a podcast with my friend Preet Bharara where I talked about things that may end any possible political future I may have. I never had an intent to run for Congress, but, we'll see what the world looks like. I mean, I am trying to help save our democracy. And someday, if that's the right path to be on and it's the right thing for my district where I live, then, maybe I'll do it.
Well, you'd have our support. Mimi, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a real eye-opening conversation, and I hope we'll get a chance to chat again.
Absolutely. Thanks, Andy. Great to be with you.
All righty. Take care.
Bye.
Okay, so an interesting thing happened this week. We got a series of voicemails left on the studio's answering machine from a guy named Colton Blue. He's got a lot of opinion. And quite honestly, I didn't see him as someone who was our typical demo, one of our listeners, but apparently he is. So I thought it'd be interesting to give him some time on the air. And let's just talk. That's what everybody's like saying we should do these days, right? We got to talk to each other, right? So without further ado, Colton Blue. Look at me. I'm a poet and I know it. Colton, welcome to the back room.
Thanks for having me very much. I appreciate this opportunity.
So you left us a lot of messages, man.
Well, you never responded, so I just figured I better keep talking until somebody said something.
You've got a lot to say.
Well, I do. I've listened to your show sometimes. I try to listen to the shows from the other side just so I know what y'all are thinking. But I just think you're so misguided. You got it all wrong. You don't get him and you don't get it. You don't get us.
Fair enough. What's there to get? Tell us, who are you? Where do you live? What makes you tick?
Well, this isn't, I just can't really like personal. I don't want to do personal stuff on a national kind of broadcast thing. But I'm from a red state and I live in the land of fruits and nuts now.
Where's that?
Good Lord, you're liberal. California. California is the land of fruits and nuts. Most people know, but you don't. Of course, you don't know that. I live in the part of California. It doesn't matter. It's nobody's business where I live. But what you all don't get is how simple it is. It's just about making the country great again. That's all it is. And
All right, but Donald Trump spends a lot of time on nonsensical stuff. For example, he wants to get rid of pennies. How do you feel about that?
well, I haven't heard anything about getting rid of J.C. Penney's. I mean, I've been shopping there my whole life. That would just be awful. Why would he want to do something like that?
Not J.C. Penney, the little brown coin pennies, 1 cent pennies.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, who cares about that? Pennies are a pain in the ass.
Well,
Pennies are a
I'm
pain
assuming-
in the ass. What
but
do you
I'm
do with
assuming-
pennies? You throw them in the dish on the counter at the fast food store.
I'm assuming you voted for Trump.
Of course I did.
Paper straws. He hates paper straws. How do you feel about paper straws?
Well, paper straws are disgusting. They they got all soggy when you're trying to. 2/3 of the way through a drink, you can't even drink it anymore because it's falling apart in your mouth. It's such a soggy paper.
Is that the job of the United States president, to be spending his time on pennies and paper straws and the pressure of toilet flushes? How's your toilet flushing, by the way? Strong enough for you?
My toilet, it gives me a lot of issues. There's no question about it. But I've gotten really good at dealing with that. But as for shower pressure, I could totally see the need for improving that.
Is there anything Donald Trump could do that would make you go, you know what? I can't support this guy anymore. Could he kill somebody? Would that make you not support this guy?
No, because if he were to kill somebody, it's because there's a reason. Because it's a necessity. And it's about time something gets done.
So when Donald Trump years ago said he could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and not lose support, listening to you speak, he was right?
Well, he didn't say who he's going to shoot on Fifth Avenue.
So it's all about who the victim is.
Well, of course, he's not going to go out and murder a normal person. There's somebody that has it coming.
So the murder's okay as long as it's justified.
Well, sure. Why wouldn't it be? We're
No.
protecting America. Protecting America, you got to kill people sometime.
And that's making America great again.
Of course it is.
Murdering people that you...
Oh, here it is. Oh, let's take all the murderers and rapists and let's just say, oh, these poor Americans are going to get hurt.
What do you do for a living, Colton?
Well, I'm retired at this point. There was a time when I was a ballroom dancer professionally, and I worked on cruise ships.
Not the answer I was expecting.
But I had an injury, and unfortunately, I had to retire early. That's what happened.
Well, look, we appreciate you leaving us messages. We appreciate you listening, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
All right. Colton, thanks for coming on the back room. All right, that was Colton Blue, also known as my friend Nathan Dean, a very talented actor from L.A. And we'll hear from both Nathan and Colton again soon. This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Langell. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.